became clear that another AI would have had better chances of building the best prompt. Only 10% of the population is actually capable of taking full advantage of prompting. There's only one thing that someone that wants to grow needs to do in order to prepare for AI. It is to focus extensively on the data that the organization has and that the organization can leverage on.
Everybody, welcome to the Devico Breakfast Bar. Here we speak with different people involved in the business landscape, share their expertise, delve into the latest tech trends, and explore the ins and outs of IT outsourcing. I'm Oleg Sadikov, and today I'm excited to have Andrea Volpini, the founder and the CEO of WordLift and Insideout10, with 20 plus years of world-class experience in online strategies, digital media, and search engine optimization. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss new episodes. Hi, Andrea, and thanks for joining me today.
Hello, hi. It's my pleasure to be here today.
Could you start by telling us a bit about yourself and your background?
Yeah, I've been starting in the early days of the internet back in 1995 in an internet service provider. And then I moved into the web development space. I had co-founded the first agency that then was sold and acquired by another web agency. And then I became a general manager of this new agency, and we were focusing on content management system, and so we're developing platform for building websites. And then all of a sudden I decided that managing web pages needed a solid metadata infrastructure, and so I started to focus more on semantic web technologies. And then after a few years in research, I ended up in creating WordLift. 2017, it was becoming mature, also from the search engine optimization perspective, to be automated. And then a few years before, I started another company in Austria, focusing on natural language processing. And so here we are.
Great. What about pivotal moments in your career that were game changers for you? To remember one or a few of them?
Well, yeah, I mean, one clear point for me was right before starting up with Insideout10, I was moving away from the pure system integration type work and consultancy work. And I started to think more clearly about the importance of building products and capitalizing on the experience that I was gaining from consultancy. I mean, that was pretty clear to me. And I'm still working on that path in a way, still designing a path that can bring us to create a compelling product that takes into account all the years spent between system integration and consultancy in digital marketing.
What about your hobbies and interests outside of work? How do they contribute to your professional success?
Well, I mean, I'm pretty avid runner, and I like a lot hiking. I was actually climbing last week. I need everything, any type of sport, from running to climbing, free diving, everything that can detach me from the day-to-day work. It's a good experience for me. I also spend a good amount of time meditating on a daily basis, and I'm still improving there, even though I've been doing that for many years now.
Andrea, you have been investing in the evolution of prompting within AI for a while. Can you explain why prompting is significant in the current AI landscape?
Yeah, I think that the scenario that we're living in is predominantly characterized by the emergence of complex AI systems that are leveraging on few important developments happening in the deep learning community that brought us the existing large language models and to the way in which we can interact with these large language models. I've been following machine learning and deep learning over the course of now almost 10 years, even more. And I don't have this fragmented vision of LLMs on one side and knowledge graphs on the other side. I see everything very tightly connected. But it is also clear that the way in which the user interface is changing because of the introduction of AI, has to do with the ability that we have to interact in natural language with system. That brings us back to prompting. So how do we interact today with an AI system? Predominantly, we do that in context, meaning by creating a context to a system that understands, the probability of the distribution of the words and subwords that we provide within the context. 2021, I think I went to a conference and I started to say that every SEO should become a prompt master. That was before ChatGPT, of course, but it was already a few years after the introduction of the transformer architecture that brought us to today's language models. And so at that time, I was very convinced that in order to do marketing, in order to create compelling content, we had to familiarize with prompting. And I was doing experiments with fusion models for generating images, starting from text. I was training the first GPT-2 version or similar models. T5 was had a big impact in my career at that point. T5 is this open source model from Google that for the first time brought us in contact with something that actually can deal with different type of tasks. So it was the first multitasker type of model because of its innovative architecture. And so prompting has always been, since then, kind of a clear way for me to improve also the way in which we program WordLift and in which we can develop, further the technology. And this is went on until I think a year ago when we started to bring more of this functionality into the dashboard and we started to generate more content or content at a different scale. I mean, one thing is, of course, to create blog posts, which I would not advise to do with the language model, but of course, I've been experimenting with that. I always advise people to work on small pieces of text because of the limitation of the context window in a language model. Now, these limitations are pretty much becoming obsolete, and we have Gemini Pro or 1.5 that can handle up to, 1 million tokens. So we do have this very gigantic context window, but I wouldn't advise you to write a blog post with a language model, but rather to augment your ability to write using a language model. Anyway, at that point, I started to work on fine-tuning and templating prompts based on the data. Because in order to scale the production of content, we have to not only fine-tune the model, but also make sure that the prompt was responding well to the type of data that we had in the graph. And started to come up with different templating systems for language that were available at that time. And it was not just a prompt. It was actually a template that was able to generate based on the data, maybe hundreds of variations of a prompt. At that point, maybe a year ago, maybe a little bit more, I realized that, the era of prompting is almost over. Because if in order to succeed, we need to build a template system that can capture the different nuances of the content that we want to generate, based on the different characteristics of the data in the graph, then a computer will be best suited for doing this type of work. And the intuition was right. In fact, as more research paper came out on topic of retrieval augmented generation and how in context we can convey meanings to a language model, then it became clear that another AI would add better chances of building, the best prompt for the expected outcome. And it's still not so clear right now because they're still overwhelmed with interfaces that are prompt-based. I was actually reading a statistics the other day, and guess what? Even in advanced Western society, only 10% of the population is actually capable of taking full advantage of prompting. And that poses a challenge on the usability of prompting as a mean of interacting with an AI system. It just doesn't work. Because if only 10% in the most advanced economies in the world can actually take full advantage of an AI system, it means that prompting is not a good mean.
Yeah, but the rest can take partial advantage, which is kind of useful too, no?
It is, but because of the complexity of a system that is designed to hallucinate, right? Because, we have to think that posing a language model like happened when ChatGPT was launched, it means exposing the world population to a potentially misleading system that only few can actually control. to the point where they can have confidence on the outcome. Because it is true what you're saying. I mean, if I'm not literate enough, or if I'm not just keen on being extreme pedantic as I need to be when writing to a machine, the chances that I get an output that it's plausible truth, but it's actually misleading are very high. And that's the intrinsic risk of prompting these days. And so prompting as it is not going to survive long. As a matter of fact, we're already seeing more advanced large language model providers like Anthropic that are creating this middleware that translates the intent into the proper prompt. And I've been working with this framework called the SPI that I really advise everyone that has some work related with the large language model to invest time on, because the SPI is a framework introduced by the NLP team at Stanford that actually has addressed the problem of replacing prompting and bringing back the idea of programming and the idea of machine learning, having data that can be used to train the model to generate the prompt itself.
And then the startups will be acquired by OpenAI, right?
I don't know. I mean, it's an open source framework. I don't think that...
Oh, it's an open source. Okay.
The team at Stanford has contributed so much to the world of natural language processing that I don't think they care if I'm in a...
No, if they're open source, then obviously.
Open source. I mean, these frameworks are extremely transformative, highly innovative. We don't know if they will exist in 12 or 18 months or so. But, the idea behind it, it's going to, of course, be embedded into the large AI providers. And that's a fact. I can predict it quite easily that this is how it's going to work. So we're coming back, in a way, to focusing on data first. Because, okay, what happened when you move from prompting to programming is that you start thinking in terms of signature. You start thinking in terms of data classes and modules. You start looking at how do you program a language model. And guess what? You will start using existing data sets in order to align the model to your expected outcome. This is also has to do with what we were discussing before, the explosion of the context window, which was a limiting factor a couple of years ago, and now it's becoming more and more available. I mean, we regularly use model with 128,000 tokens, which is a significant amount of content compared to 2,000 tokens that we're forced to use with T5 or the 768 tokens that we had, I think, with GPT-2. Or, I mean, the scale of growth and expansion of the context window, it's basically bringing us to focus less on fine-tuning a model and more on programmatic prompting of the model. So before, a year ago or a couple of years ago, I would have advised you to invest on fine-tuning models and create, specific models that would react well with your use case. Right now, because of the context window being larger, we can actually feed the model with multiple examples, and that would be our fine-tuning. Now, the efficiency of the system, it's, of course, very much reduced because we're still using these gigantic models, whether it would be better and more environmental friendly if we would start using, more specific models. But you get the point. I mean, you don't need to fine-tune a model for getting a specific outcome. You can rather build a good set of examples that the large model will be using in context. And that gives us tremendous flexibility, of course.
You have a deep specialization in symbolic AI. For our listeners, can you explain what is symbolic AI and how it differs from other AI approaches like deep learning?
Yeah. So I think that I tend to summarize the history of 60 years of AI in typically 3 steps. So deduction, induction, and abduction. And so in order for a system to learn the representation of the world, we worked in the past in 2 ways. So one way, of course, is that we can describe the system and how it should behave. And so this is kind of the symbolic way of doing things that was pretty much introduced in the early 60s. So, for example, I can draw, the rules of how my hand can be represented. So there are 5 fingers. This is the one that I will use for pointing, and this is typically smaller than the other one. It's like I can kind of design the rules that the system will use for representing a hand. And this is working top down. So there is someone that has a specific domain knowledge that is designing how things should operate. I was recently in New York and I spotted an artist called Harold Cohen. And it's kind of father figure for the symbolist because he designed a system for painting with a set of rules. He designed a software that he called Aaron that became his painter friend. So he was painting with Aaron, and Aaron was a piece of code that evolved over 35 years, 40 years of Harold's career. And Aaron is a set of instruction on, for example, how to draw an end or how to organize the composition of a frame. And, if there is an object in the front, what happens to the object right behind. So it's top down. Harold designed Aaron by feeding it with a set of rules on how to draw things, how to paint things. So he had 100% control over the potential outcome, but of course he had to do a lot of adjustment over, 35, 40 years of his career. I think there's still his exhibition at the Whitney Museum in New York. So if you're there, I would advise. This is a great representation of what symbolic AI is. Now, on the other hand, there is the school of the connectivist that have tried to emulate the human brain by working on different statistical approaches that would say that in order to represent the world, we can derive general rules by feeding the system with samples. And so we can let the system work by induction and try to understand reality by looking at samples. And so large amount of data would feed a network of neurons that are connected in such a way that they can calculate potential error loss. And with propagation, then we can adjust this weight so that the system learns by looking at samples that we provide. And so these are kind of the two schools within AI. And because I've been investing on metadata and semantic technology, I start working in AI with this approach of designing the role of the system and how these can be embedded into an ontology. And an ontology is a representation of the world and, the relationship between the different entities. And then, I started to work on graphs. And this is kind of one path. Now, on the other path, what brought us to the language model? And now, in the last 2 years, these two separate worlds are converging into what I define the era of abduction. So we can build systems that can make hypotheses based on a knowledge domain and then can iterate on these hypotheses using statistical approaches and vice versa. We are building a synergy where the symbolic AI is supporting and sustaining the connectivist approaches. And DSPI is, by the way, an example of these, where using a symbolic AI, I can feed the system with the data that I know it would create the outcome that I want. But I can also use the symbolic AI approach for defining the loss function. And so that would give me more control. And then I can use it also for vetting the outcome of the system. So I can use some of the top-down approaches, and then I can let the system iterate much like I would do in a traditional machine learning project. This is kind of the era of abduction where we are building autonomous AI agent system that interconnects different functions that we can have formalized through APIs with magnitude of textual data.
Transitioning to discussion on IT outsourcing. During the intro call we had, you mentioned having a negative experience with IT outsourcing. Would you be willing to elaborate on what went wrong and the lessons learned from that experience?
Yeah, I have to be very, very direct here. My negative approaches has to do with, of course, my career path. And because I've been doing a lot of integration work myself in my previous entrepreneurial experiences, I know the limitation of being the outsourcer. And therefore, for me, it's very easy to see the disadvantages that I would have now that I'm focusing on building a technology middleware for helping company automate marketing in outsourcing. And this is, of course, is not black or white. We can easily outsource small work packages that are very well defined. But the reality of today's world is because of AI is facilitating, the prototypization phase, and because the technology has such a significant role in the evolution of a business, you want to keep control of the core. So you can outsource some of the parts, unless, of course, you are not doing tech. So what I'm saying is that because I am a tech company, for me, it's very hard to outsource. Plus, I know how outsourcing can go wrong or very wrong, meaning that you are not capable of defining the requirements in a clear and stringent way as a client. And therefore, whatever outsources you have on the other side will fail miserably. And then it will be a disaster for both parties. Now, is there a way to make outsourcing work? Yes, it is, of course. I mean, as long as you have very clear requirements, then you can make outsourcing work, provided that you are not doing something core. Because if you're doing something core, you want to keep the technology, the development in-house, because that's capital, if you are in tech. Okay, so it's a very specific vision of someone who is in tech and who has failed miserably several occasions to find the requirements. Why do we fail in creating the right requirements? The reality is that the right requirements only come from iterating on things. And so the idea of outsourcing, it's wrong, in my opinion, because it doesn't allow you to iterate before you start the work. If I iterate myself and I make mistakes and then I consolidate the requirements, then I can do outsource. But if I come to you and you say, hey, I can outsource, whatever task, then I will come with some requirements, but these requirements will not be sufficient because they would be just the results of my initial thinking of how the problem needs to be addressed. And I need to do way more iteration live into the field in order to consolidate the requirements that would bring me to the success of the relationship with the outsourcer.
In the context of your industry, do you believe there are viable alternatives to IT outsourcing that offer similar benefits without the associated risks you mentioned?
I think that I work in SaaS, right? And I work in marketing. I'm developing a tool. Ideally, there are some tasks that can be outsourced, but it's also very easy for me to find contractors that would work long term with me that would do what an outsourcer would do for me. But at the same time, we can invest in the relationship, retain the capital, kind of share the values of the company. Building a company, it's about building a semantic capital, right? So semantic capital means that we can share meanings with our clients. Clients come because they want to increase their business. Clients come to WordLift because they want to reduce the cost and increase the visibility of their content, sell more on their e-commerce. But then there is an underlying agreement between us and the client, is that we share a vision that better data creates a better world, creates a society that is less polarized, more equal. Now, this is a narrative. And so this narrative is what I would, Sean O'Flaherty would define semantic capital. This is the way in which we exchange value. If you don't believe in my narrative, you don't work with me, even if you want your business to grow. Because in the end, you first buy the meanings that we're sharing. And I'm selling you my meanings, not because I want to manipulate you, but because I believe that that's my vision of the world. Outsourcing, on the other hand, it's very hard to keep these meanings, right? Because it's a third party. It's a black box. You give requirements, you get an output, and your semantic capital decreases because there is another party that is involved in the exchange. And so the client on the other side doesn't see the real 100% value of you because some part of being outsourced to another one. And again, I'm not against outsourcing 100%. It would be impossible to be companies without outsourcing. I'm just saying that the risk is that you don't retain enough control on your semantic capital.
Thanks for sharing your vision. Many entrepreneurs still might feel overwhelmed by the idea of incorporating, for example, AI into their businesses. As we wrap up our conversation, what practical advice would you give to someone who is considering dipping their toes into this tech-driven realm?
There's only one thing that someone that wants to grow needs to do in order to prepare for AI. It is to focus extensively on the data that the organization has and that the organization can leverage on. And this is pivotal. Of course, it's the core of our business because people that come to us have realized that they want to work with AI and that maybe a knowledge base is as important as a language model. That's kind of the assumption that I want everyone that is focusing on growth using AI needs to focus on.
Andrea, thanks for sharing your vision, your thoughts. You're very deep in this area, and I'm sure your expertise, your vision will be useful for our audience. Thanks for joining me today.
Thanks to you for inviting me.
If you enjoy our discussion and want to stay updated on future episodes, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell. That way, you will not miss out on the latest insights and conversations from the Devico Breakfast Bar. See you in a week.